Hello and welcome back to Marketing for Charities briefing number 10, brought to you by the Worshipful Company of Marketors. My name's Peter Rees and it's my pleasure once again to be your narrator for this briefing. In this session we're going to cover part 3 of tactics with a particular focus on marketing communications. On this slide I'm going to go through the agenda items we're going to cover in today's briefing. I'm going to start off bringing together and reminding you about 3 different models we've discussed previously and show how they fit together in the context of marketing communications. I'm then going to go into some detail about the communications mix and the difference between offline and online or digital marketing, and then show how these tactics which we're describing today can be applied to the RISA model, which, if you recall, talks about the Stakeholder Journey. I'll round off this briefing with a discussion of campaign planning and show you how you could build a campaign plan that would be suitable for a charity, and then review and position the next steps in the briefing and show you how we're going to progress moving forward. I'll deal with how any questions will be tackled and finish with some concluding remarks. Now, I know this is going to be quite a long briefing compared to some of the others, so do feel free to pause at any time and have a cup of tea and a biscuit if that will help your concentration. And again, as I've said before, do feel free to review and revise any sections which you might need to watch more than once. I'll start then with some revision of some of the things we've discussed previously. If I can remind you of some of the models we've looked at previously, the first one is the communications mix, which, as you may remember, is a list of all the tools and techniques and media channels that we have available to us to get our messages across to a given target market. And you can see, if you review this list, that it's a combination of digital tools and techniques such as social media or email campaigns, but also some offline techniques such as advertising or public relations. And I'm going to go through the more important of these in the rest of this briefing. Now, this whole area is quite a large topic, and if I was teaching it to undergraduates or postgraduates at university, to teach this communications mix might take, 2 or 3 hours of lectures for an 8-week session. So that could be 24 hours of lectures just to cover the communications mix. Now, clearly I don't have time to go into that level of detail today, so you might need to supplement what I'm talking about in this briefing with further reading or research that you can do. If you need any help and advice, please contact me and I'll give you my details later on. The second model was the 3Ms model, which is one I described and developed some time ago to plan a marketing communications campaign. And if you remember, it's a combination of the messages, that's what you want to say, the markets, which are the target stakeholder groups to whom you wish to communicate, and the methods shown across the middle of this diagram, which are effectively the tactics, the different tools available picked from the communications mix. And then finally, I discussed with you the RISA model and said that we would need to develop a particular worksheet for each step of the RISA model, which are reach, interact, connect, engage and retain. And then to complete the worksheet you would need to put in objectives, tactics and metrics for each step. Well, in this briefing I'm going to particularly focus on the tactics which go in the middle column there. So this briefing is all about the tactics you can use to build a campaign using the 3Ms model and to fill in the different steps and be effective to achieve your objectives in the different stages of the RISA model. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I'll make a start by looking at the communications mix, both the digital or online techniques and offline. On this slide I'm going to show you some of the most important offline marketing tools that relate to charity marketing, and they're shown around this diagram here. It's advertising, personal selling, public relations, direct mail, exhibitions, events and lobbying. And generally speaking, these are very good at reaching large audiences. So here on the right hand side are listed the generic strengths and weaknesses in offline communications tools. The strengths are, as I said, wide coverage. If you think of things like a national TV advert or print advertising in a national newspaper, then you can reach millions or perhaps tens of millions of recipients. Now, on the negative side, that a lot of the money you're spending on this may be wasted. If you had a TV advert that reached 10 million people, it may be that the majority of those in fact are not the target audience. So you're spending a huge amount of money reaching people to whom the message is not relevant. So to that extent, it may be wasteful. On the positive side, most of these communications tools are quite easy to understand and easy to arrange. They're not as technically difficult as some of the digital communications tools we'll cover, but you can get going much more quickly as a result. For some of these, you may need third-party expertise and therefore incur costs with these third parties. And I'm thinking here about things like using an advertising agency or a media buying company or a public relations agency. These people have a huge amount of expertise in these different areas, but you have to pay to use it. So to that extent, they may be quite expensive. They're less efficient than digital marketing communications tools because they're not specifically targeted, and they're also harder to measure. Now, you can recruit an agency to measure the effectiveness of print advertising or radio advertising or TV advertising or even public relations, but the costs incurred often outweigh the advantage of doing this research. For this briefing, I'm just going to cover on what I think are the four most important of these tools for charity marketing, and those are advertising, public relations, direct marketing and events, which I'll go over in more detail on the later slides in this section. Here's a quotation that I couldn't resist sharing with you. It comes from an American businessman who was around in the last century, a gentleman called John Wanamaker, who said, "Half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is, I don't know which half." And this summarises really the points I was making on the previous slide about the inefficiency of using mass media offline communications tools and the difficulty of measuring the results. I'll start on this slide by giving some observations about offline advertising. And this is the oldest form of offline communications, generally speaking, and it's one of the most popular. As I've explained on the previous slide, many forms of it are wasteful and not cost effective for the reasons I've outlined. However, if it's localized, it can be extremely valuable and extremely effectiveness. So I'll give you a little case study here about an institution called the Hammersmith Academy, which was a new secondary school or academy which was opening in West London in 2011. So from about 2010 onwards, the Marketors Livery Company did a lot of work to assist the Hammersmith Academy in getting ready and recruiting students for that opening. We did things like, for example, their corporate identity guidelines. We helped them write and produce a prospectus, and we did lots of offline and online marketing activity, some of which is outlined here in these 4 bullet points. We produced and dropped off leaflets around houses in the catchment area for the school. We also handed out these leaflets in the street to young people who are coming out of the feeder schools who are potential recruits to come and join Hammersmith Academy in its opening year. We produced local newspaper advertising, and in fact I wrote the script and we produced a local radio ad. Now, as well as these offline activities, I then repurposed this radio ad and produced a video which I'll show you next. So although we primarily focused here on offline advertising with the top 4 bullet points, as I'll show you on this next video I'm going to play, we reused the radio ad in an online digital campaign.
Calling all Year 11 students. Are you looking for a sixth form school next year offering state-of-the-art facilities? Do you want to realise your talents and maximise your success? The new Hammersmith Academy is now open, specialising in creative and digital media and IT. It also offers a full range of academic and vocational courses. To find out more and to register your interest for applications to start in September 2011, visit ham6.com. That's HAMSIX.com.
The next area I want to discuss is public relations, whose characteristics are shown on this slide. So public relations is all about influencing target stakeholders to adopt a point of view positive to your organisation or to take a particular course of action. So if we look here at the sort of typical things that public relations companies do, you can see the most popular one and the one most people know about is press releases. Now, I've been involved in public relations companies for many, many decades, and it's occurred to me that over the years I've spent hundreds of thousands of pounds and dollars and euros with public relations companies. And when I first started in the late 1970s, it was to do with press releases, which you're probably familiar with, and this is getting news and information into the hands of media in the hope that they'll republish it. And originally press releases were about getting your news items placed in newspapers and magazines. Just one word of caution: if you want to do press releases, you need a little bit of thought and help with it, possibly, because it is quite a specialist area to be able to use proper phraseology and presentation to get your press releases looking professional. Now, this is one of the reasons why some companies outsource press releases. Over the years, I've got quite proficient in it, and in fact ended up in my last organisation writing the press releases myself and then just using a PR company to get them into the media. They can also organise meetings or visits or trips for your organisation, often with a combination of journalists. So, for example, when I worked for IBM, the computer company, I organised a week-long tour where we took about 10 journalists around different IBM sites and production facilities across the USA, talking about the tools and techniques and products that IBM was developing and delivering into the market, which we were covering at the time. Lobbying is also very important, and this is getting your point of view across to influential stakeholders such as government, central government, local government, the courts, or other regulatory groups. And often PR companies can help you with their contacts and their interactions that they have with people in these target groups. Public relations are also very good for tackling issues and concerns that your charity might want to bring to the public attention. It might be to do with child safety or the environment or animal welfare. Whatever it is your charity is concerned about, public relations is a good tool to get those concerned into the mind of target stakeholders, often through the media and sometimes directly. You can use public relations to inform and educate your target groups about the point of view that you wish to express, and for the reasons that I've described, it's often outsourced to a public relations agency. Looking slightly more detailed at specific things that public relations agencies can help you with, the first thing is they can raise awareness, as I've said, of your organisation or its work, the offers that you have and the things you do for your beneficiaries, or particular causes or points of view that you want to change and get your opinion across into the minds of target stakeholders. It can generate engagement with particular stakeholders groups, and particularly here I'm thinking about the press and the media and other stakeholders. It can monitor what's being said about you, and many PR agencies offer a press cutting service, or now a digital and offline coverage service, where they can give you reports on how well and how widely your organisation is being covered and spoken about in different online and offline channels. They can manage your company, your organisation, your charity's response to both good and bad news. If something particularly important happens in your sector, they can help get your response to it across and into the hands and the minds of your target audiences. They can also arrange visits or lunches or briefings and host groups of stakeholders, the media, the press, or whoever it happens to be, potentially donors or sponsors, to see the work of the charity in action. And I know, for example, that Bernardo's, the children's charity, often use these briefings and these visits as a way to engage with target donors and sponsors. One word of caution: nowadays, lots of PR companies appear online, if you search for them, and offer to get your public relations releases distributed across the internet. So just be cautious of these. Some of them are very reputable, have a good reputation. Some of them will take your money but then do little to actually get your messages across, particularly in online media. So just be cautious if you're considering using an online public relations distributor. Do some research and try and get customer testimonials before you give them any of your money. The next offline media tool is direct mail, which in the 70s and 80s was extremely popular. And this is letters and post that's delivered to people's homes or people's offices. It's been very popular in the past, and essentially it's unsolicited direct mail, and it can be a major source of irritation to the recipient. And I know, speaking personally, if I get what I would class as junk mail through my letterbox, I quite often just throw it in the bin. You can tell from the envelope what it is without even opening it. So if you are going to use direct mail, try and address it to people who have expressed an interest or might be interested in the messages you wish to communicate. Otherwise, you risk a huge percentage of it being thrown straight in the bin unread. Now, in order to collect mailing lists or build a mailing list, sometimes they can be bought in, because there are agencies that offer to sell you a mailing list. If you want to, for example, communicate with females between age 25 and 45 in London postcodes, you can find an agency that will sell you that mailing list. The question is how reliable and how accurate and how up to date it is. So if you are going to use direct mail, it's much better to build the mailing list yourself, because you're collecting the valid names and addresses of recipients, and they have expressed to you an interest in receiving your information. So mailing lists, in my experience, that are built and maintained in-house because the recipient has expressed an interest, are likely to be much more effective and much more accurate. Now, once you have a mailing list, of course, there are costs in maintaining it and maintaining its quality, and deleting people who've moved or no longer want to receive your information, and adding on new recipients. Standard direct mail, paper mail, is much less prevalent now because digital marketing tools and email campaigns, which I'll talk about later, give much better results and can be much more highly targeted, managed and measured. The issue is that if you send the same newsletter to every stakeholder group, you're likely to be wasting a lot of money and getting a poor result. I've spoken to many charities who very proudly tell me that yes, they have a monthly newsletter, and I ask who do they send it to, and they say, well, we send it to our donors, our sponsors, our volunteers, our staff, perhaps our clients and beneficiaries. Well, if you think about it, it's very unlikely that those 5 different stakeholder groups have the same interest. So most of the newsletter that you're sending out, or they're sending out to those same 5 stakeholder groups, is uninteresting to most of the people. So if you are going to build and send out newsletters, whether they're paper ones or electronic ones, then as I'll explain later on, you need to really differentiate them and make a different email or a different direct mail piece newsletter to, for example, volunteers or donors or sponsors or beneficiaries or your own staff. So that's a summary of the strengths and weaknesses of direct mail. One of the most popular and successful tools, offline tools for charities, is the use of event marketing, and these can be very effective if targeted to the particular stakeholder group that you're trying to influence. And here is a list of some of the reasons and some of the things that have worked successfully for charities in event marketing. You can use events to recognise staff or your clients and other stakeholders. And in fact, I was involved in a charity for people with non-accidental head injuries in East London, and they ran a series of events where the staff and their clients and the press and the media were brought together to share ideas and share stories and explain the work and success that the charity has had in this area. It allows the charity to demonstrate their capability, and as I said, I know a number of children's charities that use visits to their centres to help people in the areas of the press and the media and perhaps donors or sponsors to see the work of the charity supporting vulnerable children, see them in action in and around the streets of London and across the UK. Events can also be used to lobby influences, and another charity I worked with which helps members of the armed services with post-traumatic stress disorder organised a very successful event in a meeting space in the House of Lords, which was attended by senior members of the armed forces, by journalists, by the media and by members of the government and the opposition, members of Parliament, for a very successful evening where the charity explained its point of view, explained the particular necessity of building treatment programmes and support for these individuals to help them overcome their difficulties. And it was very successful and in fact got a lot of publicity and did raise a lot of extra funding as a result of what the attendees heard. Events can be used to announce news, either successes you've had in your charity sector or news of new offerings or new outlets or new centres perhaps that you're opening to engage with your clients. Events are very good for recruiting volunteers, and there's often charity fairs, or there used to be charity fairs, where charities would group together. And in fact, the Corporation of the City of London used to organise a charity fair for charities in and around London, where they could have a stall to present their credentials and in fact try and recruit new members and in fact donors and sponsors. They're also good for raising money, and some of the events are great for having fun. So I'm thinking of things like Red Nose Day events or National Coffee Mornings or the Lord Mayor of London's Big Curry Lunch. So lots of social events, events with a high social content, can be a great way to raise money, engage stakeholders and give everybody some fun at the same time. That's the end of my quick tour through offline communications. Now let me turn to the digital communications mix, which is shown here in this diagram. And as you can see, there are a number of tools that I'm recommending we think about for charity marketing, and these, in my experience, are the most effective. It's email, the use of your organisation's website, online public relations, a technique called search engine marketing, which I'll cover in a later section of this briefing, blogs, social networks, and social media advertising. And as before, I'm showing you here generically the strengths and weaknesses of this digital communications mix. The strengths are that it can be very tightly targeted, and I'll explain on later slides how it's possible to target these very specifically to an audience with specific characteristics which might make them attractive to your charity. Generally speaking, the cost per contact is much lower on digital tools and techniques, which is why research has shown that digital marketing and digital communications is now more prevalent in most markets in most countries than the more traditional offline tools and techniques. In many of these techniques, you only pay for results, so you only pay when an ad is successful or when an ad is clicked on, rather than paying for an ad in a newspaper or on the television or on the radio, where you don't know what the results are going to be and you can't measure the results. As it shows here, digital communications tools are extremely easy to measure, and most of them come with their own set of metrics and analytics to help you understand how effective they are. Now, on the weaknesses, they do require a more deep understanding of their capabilities and function than offline tools, and this is often not fully understood or addressed by the charities that I work with, who sometimes tend to delegate the use of these digital channels to perhaps a junior member of the organisation who understands them better than the management. Some of them need information technology skills, and it's very easy to waste money unless you pay particular attention and use these effectively. Despite the fact that they're more cost effective at a cost per contact level, you can waste money if you don't use them efficiently. And I'll cover that and how we could address that point later on in this briefing. So they need management understanding and focus. It's not something you can delegate to an agency or a third party or to a clued up younger member of your staff. It's something that all the management team and all the organisation needs to understand to make sure you use them in the most effective way and get the best return on your investment. Now, as before, I don't have time today to cover all of them, so I'm just going to focus on 4 of these particular tools. The first one is email, and then a technique called search engine marketing, which I shall explain later on, followed by social networks and social media advertising. I think it's fair to say that the most popular digital communications channel is email marketing, and these are direct emails delivered to a particular email address. Now, of course, for this to be successful, you need a valid email address. So a lot of the area that you have to pay attention to is building a mailing list of valid email addresses of people who've actually requested the information that you're sending out. If you fail to do that, the information you send will be treated as spam, and if the email systems and the communications network that you use detect that your organisation is sending out a high amount of what is seen as spam by the recipients, they can actually block you and prevent you using them. So it's very important. The most important thing is to understand you need to build valid email addresses and get permission of the people you're sending your emails to. Now, once you have a valid email address, you can get very detailed metrics to see how successful your email campaigns are. So you can find out, did you send it to a valid email address? And you can weed out invalid email addresses of people who've moved or changed jobs or don't want your information anymore. You can also find out, was it opened? How many times was it opened? Was it shared from the recipient to somebody else? Was the link inside it clicked to bring the recipient back to your website or back to somewhere else to take a particular course of action? And did it generate the required conversion or positive activity or goal? So, for example, if you're sending out emails inviting people to register for a newsletter, how many valid email addresses, how many of those emails were open, how many people clicked on the link inside to come back to give you their registration details, and how many people actually filled them in and said, yep, I'm happy to receive a newsletter. All of those things can be measured with the analytics systems that go with email campaigns. So it's most important that stakeholders have to register for your email, and this is a requirement of British and European data protection regulations. You're not allowed to send unsolicited emails because you'll get blocked and you'll get reported as sending out spam. So as you'll see from later campaigns that I'm going to discuss, one of the most prevalent things that you see is when you go to a website for the first time, whether it's a charity or a commercial website selling products or services, the thing that often happens the very first time you visit is a little window pops up saying, "Hi, welcome to our website," because the system knows you haven't been there before, and it invites you to register for an email. So that's why it's so prevalent, because all of these brands want to capture your email address, because once they've got your email address, they can start talking to you. In the UK, once they've got your address, they're then required to send you a confirmation email saying, "Thank you for registering. Please click this link to finish your registration," or "Please click this link to confirm you're happy to receive our email." So in the UK, we have to do a two-step certification. The first time where the recipient just gives you their details, and then they have to also do a second step where they confirm that they meant to give you their details and they're now happy to receive the emails and information that you wish to send them. Now, emails sound like quite a simple thing, but there's quite an art to producing effective emails in the sense of ones that work in an email campaign. So if you're thinking of a campaign, you need to test emails on a small section of the target audience to see which version work. So it's things like there's the title of the email. What's the email's title? The subject of the email. You could try two different versions. When the recipient opens the email, what do they see? Is it a picture? Is it a link? Is it in colour? Is it in black and white? And what message is inside the email? And then what happens and where do they go to when they click on the link? Which page does it take them to? So you need to test different options to see which one is most effective before you do the full email to the total email list. The next technique I want to talk about is called search engine marketing. But before I get into that, I want to spend a little time talking about how search works to help us understand how we can use it to our advantage. Now, all of us take search for granted, and it's something we use every day. But not everybody realizes how it works. Well, the way that it works is Google and other search engines, but let's just talk about Google as an example, every day sends out pieces of software called search robots or spiders that go across the internet and read the information on all of the web pages on the visible internet. And it records all of that information in a big database called the Google Search Index. And that's a record of all of the information, the pictures, the images and the words that are stored on all of the pages of all of the websites on the visible internet. So it's a huge undertaking, and it's something that goes on all the time. Now, people ask me, well, how often would Google come and look at my website? Well, it depends. Google will go and look at active websites. So somebody like the BBC's news website, for example, is constantly changing as news is updated. So Google looks at that very often. And the BBC News website has a huge amount of customers and visitors. So Google recognizes it as a very active website of people who are looking at constantly changing information. So Google might go and visit the BBC News website thousands of times a day to make sure the index is up to date. If, on the other hand, you have a small charity with perhaps just a few pages on your website that never changes and has very few visitors, it's not an active website, nobody comes and looks at it, Google will recognise that fact and visit your website much less frequently, perhaps every few days or every few weeks, just to check that nothing has changed, but essentially won't look at your website very frequently. And that's how Google builds this index, which helps later on, as I'll explain, to give us the search results when we do a search. Now, just to give you some statistics, Google searches 30 trillion web pages 100 billion times a month, and that's a lot of naught. So there's a huge amount of activity going on, which is completely unseen by most of its users. But that's what's going on behind the scenes for Google building this search database. And in fact, the Google stores information about those pages, those 30 trillion pages in the Google index, which is now at 100 million gigabytes of data. So huge volumes here, and that's how Google builds a search index, which it uses to help us when we perform a search using the Google search engine. And I'll describe that in a little bit more detail on the next slide. So now that we've researched and discussed how Google builds up its index, let's see how it helps an individual user who might be searching for something. So here's a user who types in their query into the Google search engine. Google goes away and looks in its global index, and it returns a search results page such as the one we see here. Very familiar to all of us and something we all do many times a day. You then click on a particular line within that, and here I've clicked on Cancer Research UK, and I've got the search results page, the actual page on that organisation's website, and that's the process of search which we're all very familiar with. Now if you go back and look at the actual structure of a search results page on the bottom left here, you might notice it's split into two parts. At the top of the page, the first two results shown here are indicated with a little word at the top left that says it's an advert. So in this case, Macmillan Cancer Support is shown as a paid ad, and the Centre for Advanced Brain Cancer Research is also a paid ad. And that means that those organisations have paid Google to place an advert for their organisation, for their charity, at the top of the search results page. And this is analogous to paying to have an ad in a newspaper or a magazine. These organisations have paid Google to place the ad at the top of the results page. It's paid advertising. Now, unlike offline advertising, this is also called pay-per-click advertising, because the fact is that these organisations are only charged if their ad is clicked on. So if I got this search results page and there's Macmillan Cancer at the top, if I don't click on that ad, Macmillan doesn't pay anything. If I did click on the Macmillan Cancer link, that is the point at which they're charged by Google, charged to advertise. So it's pay-per-click advertising, and for this reason it's very cost effective. You only pay if the advert is clicked on or successful. Now beneath the paid section is a whole set of results. The first one of these is Cancer Research UK, which are high up in the results page due to techniques called search engine optimization. So if an organisation isn't going to pay to have their ad at the top of the results page, there are things that it can do to its website essentially to make sure that that website is high up the results pages, and in fact in this case of Cancer Research UK, it's right underneath the paid advertising, a perfect place. It's right high up on the very first results page, it's the third line down, and they're not going to have to pay to be there. Not going to have to pay Google anyway. And the reason it's there, it's because that organisation or organisations who want to be high up on the results pages use techniques called search engine optimization. And these are technical things that IT specialists do to your website to make it easy to index for Google and make it easy to read for the user. And when Google identifies a website that's got relevant, useful content that's well presented and easy to access by users, it rewards it by placing it high up on the search results page. So search engine marketing consists of these two areas. There's your ability to pay to have adverts at the top of the search results page, and there are tools and techniques that technical people can do on your website to make sure your results come up high on the results pages, high up and very close underneath the paid advertising section, and that's called search engine optimization. So these two techniques together make up the field of search engine marketing. And search engine marketing is one of the main areas that digital marketing professionals are involved with today. The first one is to plan and campaigns based on pay-per-click advertising, where you pay for your advert to be high up on the search results page, and you only pay when the ad is clicked. And the other one is doing technical things to your website to make the pages highly indexable, visible, and seen as relevant to searchers, in which case Google will reward that activity by putting you high up in the results page, straight under, ideally, the pay-per-click section. Now together, those two techniques of pay-per-click advertising and search engine optimization, or SEO, together make up search engine marketing, which is perhaps the second most important digital communications tool underneath email marketing. Now for both of these to work, for pay-per-click to work the best, you need to know which keywords people are searching on, and once that keyword is been searched or typed into the Google search engine, then that's the time you want your ad to be served and presented to that viewer. So you need to know which words are used to search for things that could appear on your website, and then you can pay Google, depending on the word. If they type in word A, you have a pay-per-click ad appear. If they type in another word, you don't. So you need to identify which are the most important words that people click on that might bring them to your website. And those words are called keywords. It's literally the words that are typed in to the Google search engine. And you need to know what's being typed in to bring people to your website, because that's where you want to pay for pay-per-click advertising. The other thing you need to know is the keywords that people type in that might bring them to your website, because knowing those keywords, you can embed them in the content of your web pages using a technique of search engine optimization, so that the keywords that appear on your web pages match the keywords that people type into the search engine, and therefore Google would see your website as relevant because it's got the keywords that people are searching for. And that's the sort of underlying process to help you decide how to construct and build a pay-per-click campaign and how to do search engine optimization. Now, it's a very quick overview and summary. There's a lot more detail, as you can imagine, to both of these techniques, which would require further teaching. So if I can help, please get in touch, or there's lots of good books you can read about these techniques that are available, which I'll recommend later on in these briefings. Now, just stepping out of the main briefing flow for a moment, I'm going to give you a digital marketing fact. It's quite interesting that the biggest companies in the world today are companies like Facebook and Google and YouTube, companies that didn't exist 25 years ago, and companies that are digital. And the reason they're so successful is because they sell paid advertising to their users. So Google makes most of its money from the pay-per-click advertising I've just described on the previous page. And Facebook gets most of its money from the advertising that it sells to brands to advertise to Facebook users. And it's the same for YouTube and the other social media channels. And the fact is that these brands like Google and Facebook and YouTube are the world's largest advertising agencies, which has contributed to their position in business now as the world's largest companies. Let me now talk about the area of social networks. These really came into prevalence at the start of the year 2000 and shortly afterwards, with brands such as Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube coming to prominence. And really, it's fair to say, I think they've revolutionized personal one-to-one communication, and it's something that many people now rely on as a main source of social engagement and news gathering and sharing ideas and thoughts. Now, it started off as allowing people to form little groups, social groups, but then brands got involved and brands started to form their own Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube or Twitter pages and started to communicate with their target markets, but also listen to what the target markets had to say about the brands. So whether they're in business to consumer or business to business markets, it was a very cost effective and in fact free way for individuals and brands, charities included, to communicate with their target markets instantaneously. As I expect you realise, if you're setting up a Facebook group, you can make it open to all members of the public, or you can close and restrict the membership and just admit people who fit your personal profile or who you wish to share perhaps confidential information with. They're very quick and easy to set up. You can do it in just a few minutes, and they can deliver very targeted advertising, which is something I'll talk about in a few slides' time. They're very easy to measure, and they all come with measurement and metrics and analytics tools to help, if you're paid advertising, to find out on the results. Now, there are some negative associations with social media which have come to light perhaps in recent years. There's a lot of bad press due to some organisations such as Facebook being thought to have done inappropriate things, collecting user data and then sharing it inappropriately with some media and government relations agencies, which may or may not have influenced elections as a result. There's also some bad content which is often talked about to do with child abuse or suicide or mental health and welfare. It can be a channel for bullying and abuse, and from the President of the USA downwards, it is often accused of carrying fake news. Now, there's a move away from some platforms as a result of all these negative comments, so brands such as Facebook are seeing somewhat of a decline in their growth, whereas new brands such as TikTok and Instagram are seeing growth, particularly among younger users. There's been seen to be some adverse socio-psychological impacts, and a lot of young people are actually thought to be spending more time online and dealing with people through digital channels rather than face-to-face, real, physical social networking. Now, in times of the COVID virus, perhaps this is a good thing, but generally speaking, some social media has been seen to be a cause of negative impact on individual social development. It also enables negative feedback and user-generated content, which is what UGC talks about. So often brands can find that people are posting negative adverse comments about the brands, which is totally fake. So it's a potential way for people who are against your brand or against your charity, probably less so in Charities' case, but for commercial brands it allows people to post negative feedback, some of which may not be true. In order to be successful, it does need proper resourcing and management, which I'll talk about later on. But when it first started, again, like search engine marketing and search engine optimization, social media in many brands, Charities included, it's given to the most junior member of the staff, because perhaps they're the only one in the organisation who really understands Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, and they were, particularly when this started in the early 2000s, it was the junior members of staff who were given the job to just post something on the internet, keep posting some tweets, keep posting on Facebook without any clear aim or marketing objective or without any clear monitoring. So in summary, those are the advantages and disadvantages on social networks, which I'll look into in a little bit more detail on subsequent slides. In order to use social networks most productively, I've listed here some examples of best practice. And if you are going to use social media, you need to decide certain things. The first thing is the aim, which is why are you doing it? And originally, as I say, when this started in the early 2000s, people just did it because they thought they had to and because other organisations were doing it. It's something you could talk about to your friends. Oh yes, we've got a Facebook page, we do Twittering, without really knowing why you were doing it. So if you are going to use social networks as a communications channel, decide why you're doing it. Is it to share information, to announce products, to gather new customers, to retain existing customers? You need to think of an aim and then think of smart objectives to measure your success against. If you're deciding to use social media to attract new customers, what's your smart objective? What's the target? What's the number you're going for? And what will success look like? You need to plan the details of the campaign or your activity in the same way as you wouldn't just randomly advertise in print or randomly advertise on the television. You shouldn't just randomly communicate on social networks because it can be seen as distracting and not very value adding. So plan the campaign, plan the activities, plan the sorts of messages that you wish to communicate. So again, it's message and market. What do you want to say? Whom do you wish to say it to using this particular social media channel that you might be considering? You need to plan the content to deliver value to the target audience. Just photographs of your building or photographs of your staff at their desk is not likely to be value added. You need to think about what would create value and be valued by the recipient. It's the same way as the content of a newsletter. What could you put on social media that people who see it would value and come back to find out more about your organisation? You need to make an editorial schedule and plan the content and the dates by which it'll be delivered. So this is not an ad hoc thing. You suddenly realise you haven't posted anything on Facebook for a couple of days, so you just post any old thing that comes to mind. You need to plan out the campaign, the content. It's like planning the editions of a radio programme moving forward. You don't just make up the script day by day. You plan the story into the future and then work towards generating content to tell that story. You need to allocate suitable resources and keep your information current and interesting and up to date, relevant and interesting to the target stakeholders. And then to see if you've achieved your objectives, you need to measure the results. So that's my top tips for using social networks effectively. The areas I've been talking about so far on social media are really free use of social media. It's how to set up a social media page, a Facebook page or a Twitter account. What I'm now going to talk about is paid activity on social media in the area of social media advertising. And it's worthwhile, before I get into that in detail, is stepping back and look about how advertising developed on the internet over let's say the past 20 years. Originally, when using the internet, there were things called pop-up ads or banner ads, and these were originally online ads which were presented to everybody who went to that web page. So if you went to a particular web page, a banner ad like this might have popped up either across the top or down the side of the page. So it was the same ad served to everybody who visited that particular web page. Things got slightly more sophisticated after that, and the area of search engine marketing turned up, as I explained a couple of slides ago, and this is the pay-per-click advertising where you pay for your advert to be served on search results pages, and this is paid advertising based on your search terms. And this is advertising based on what was interesting to users. So if you typed in a search, for example, on children's charities or child welfare or child protection, you might see a paid ad like this, which is promoting the work of the Children's Society, UK Children's Charity. So it moved from ads being same for everybody to ads that were served depending what interested you, as indicated by the things you were searching for. Things changed even further in the year 2005 when Facebook, who were the first brand to offer targeted ads. And these were ads served to people based on who the users were. So it didn't matter, didn't serve the same ad to everybody. It didn't even serve ads based on what you'd search for. It served you an ad just purely based on who you are. And I'll give you examples of this and explain how it works on subsequent slides. So for example, on Facebook, you can pay to have an ad served to, for example, recently bereaved women living within 50 miles of Leeds, or students and alumni of the University of the Arts London, or couples who have been affected by heart disease within the last year. So you can actually target really specifically based on who users actually are, which is an amazing specificity and an amazing rise in the efficiency and the effectiveness of ads that target specific detailed audiences like this. Now that raises the question, well, how on earth can a brand like Facebook know enough about us to serve us ads based on these sorts of criteria? And I'll explain how they do that on the following 3 slides. Well, social media brands can deliver that specific level of targeting for adverts because they hold a lot of data about us, and this is called metadata, and this is data about us and about our activities on those social media platforms. And let's look at this in 3 areas. The first area they look at is things like our demographics and our name, our date of birth, our location, our job and our education level, and personal and socioeconomic details. It might be something like our education level or our likely income or whether we're employed or not. And the reason they know all of this about us is because we give them a lot of the data when we sign up. In order to open a Facebook account, you need to give your age, your date of birth, and you're invited to give your address or your city. And then as you go through and use Facebook more and more, it's recording more information about you. You might add on where you went to school. You start to join Facebook groups, so therefore it knows what things you're interested in. You could probably put in your job title or tell the system where you work or start talking about where you work. Well, Facebook is reading and interpreting all that data and building up a personal profile of individual users, consolidating and absorbing all of this information. It also holds information in the following areas: psychographic information, which is what we think, what we like and what we believe in, because on Facebook you share and give information about your hobbies, you join groups and Facebook groups, and you give likes and follows, and you share comments and information and opinion about various topics. So very quickly Facebook can build up psychographic information which understands your hobbies, which groups you belong to, your attitudes, your interests, which things you like, which things you don't like, where you send a heart or a negative sign or a thumbs up or a thumbs down, a smiley face or a sad face. It also can deduce about your relationships, your family members. It can work out who you speak to a lot, who you're liking if you're in a relationship, because you state it on Facebook to say you're in a relationship with person X. It can understand your family members because you're saying, here's a picture of my brother's birthday party. It knows who you're friends with and what they're interested in. It can understand your politics based on which groups you belong to and what you're sharing or commenting on about jokes or memes or information about political issues. And you are also asked to voluntarily tell them your political point of view, your religion, the books you like, the music and the films. Now some people don't fill in all of this information, but a lot of people do, and for many people Facebook can deduce this information based on what they do when they're on the site. The third area of metadata that Facebook and other brands collect is webographics, and this is the sorts of devices you use to access Facebook or other social media sites, the time of day, which country you're in. It can work out how many hours a day, what times of day, what sort of device you use. Is it a mobile device, a desktop device? Is it a PC with Windows, or is it a Android or an iPhone device? It can also see what you're commenting on, what you like, you download, the memberships, the likes, the shares and the follows that you log and register when you use the website. And all of this information is kept and recorded about you as an individual to allow advertisers to say, for example, I'd like to target this ad to females who've been recently bereaved within 50 miles of Leeds. And Facebook will have information at that level on many people to whom those ads can be served. Before I move on to the next area, just let me summarise what we've learned so far about social media. Social media can be used in two ways, two possibilities. First of all, it is a free channel. So as a brand, as a charity, you can set up a Facebook page or a Facebook group or an Instagram page or start a Twitter account for free, and you can start communicating with target stakeholders using a free channel. A more highly targeted way of communicating is using paid online advertising on social media channels using the metadata, or because of the metadata which I've outlined on the previous slide. So just when you're thinking about social media, decide how and when you're going to use it as a free channel, and how and when you're going to pay for advertisers to be served to target groups who are social media users. Before I move on to the next area I want to cover, let me just give you another digital marketing fact. It is true to say that the majority of digital marketing communications is designed to drive the recipient, drive the target stakeholder to a particular place on the internet where they can undertake a positive action. So what does that mean in practice? It might, for example, be that you send out an ad or an email or do some pay-per-click advertising to drive somebody to a particular page on the internet where they do one of these following actions. You might take them to a page where they can register their email address so that you can start communicating with them, or they can sign up for a newsletter, or they can start receiving offers or discounts or announcements from your organisation. It might be a place where they can seek information about a new offer for a beneficiary, or to download a white paper or a report that you might have made. You might take them to a page where they can make a donation, and here on the right I'm showing you the Canadian Red Cross. This is a landing page where people are taken to help them and encourage them to make a donation. They might go to a page where they can book an appointment for treatment or a consultation or for counselling, whatever it is that you're offering to your target beneficiaries. They can download some sample information or perhaps watch or download a video. So these are the sorts of activities that you ask people to come to somewhere on your website to complete. So digital marketing, you're trying to drive people to a particular place where they can undertake a positive beneficial action. So bear that in mind as we go on to the next section and look at the next digital marketing channel that I wish to share with you. I'd now like to talk about the next topic, which is that of landing pages. Now, we've just seen that most marketing communications direct a user or a visitor to a particular page under your control. In the early days of digital advertising, the page that people were directed to was the brand's homepage. Now, this is not very efficient and not very effective, because if you send somebody to your homepage, they've then got to work out how to get through your website to find the piece of information you're trying to make them aware of, whether it's an offer, a deal, or a download. So today in digital marketing, when people click on a link they find in an advert, whether it's an email or a pay-per-click advert or a social media advert, they're directed to a particular place called a landing page. It's a standalone web page, which I'll describe shortly, and it's created specifically for that given campaign for the purpose of that campaign. So we saw on the previous slide a landing page which was collecting donations. So you could send people to a landing page which asked for donations, which asked them to register, which asked them to download an offer or a deal or a white paper or a video. And the landing page that people go to is not actually part of your main website. It's a separate place on the internet. It's usually branded to look like your website, but it's not a permanent part of your website, and it's just usually created for that one specific campaign. So that's where they go to when they're directed to a link in an email or a Google ad, or, as I say, a social media advert. Let's look at how this might seem to a user in actual practice. I might see an advert on Facebook, I click on the link, and I'm directed to a page that is a donate page, and it looks like that in that green box. Alternatively, I might have been sent an email, and if I click on the link, I'm sent to a page that looks like the Donate Now page, or I might have seen a Google pay-per-click ad, and I click on that, and it sends me to a Donate Now page. Now, in fact, all of those pages look identical, but in fact they're all different. Each one has a different landing page address. It's got a different address on the internet, known as the URL. Even if they look the same, they're actually technically, in address terms, different places on the internet. And a landing page is simply a page that users are directed to, typically just for the duration of a campaign. They're usually built for each campaign separately. So here's a campaign for collecting donations, and they're not usually part of the main website. They're designed just to collect user data or to cause a positive action. So you could go to a landing page from which you could download a video or sign up for a newsletter or give your email address or make a donation. The reason that they have separate addresses is that you can then identify the traffic and the results that came from each web page. So looking at the three examples here, I've got a Facebook ads that sends me to a Donate Now page. Using website analytics, I can see how much traffic, how many visitors came from the Facebook ad to that specific Donate Now for the Facebook ad, and how much money was collected. I can see how many people came from the email campaign and how much money was collected, and I can see how many people came from paid Google advertising and how much money was collected. So I work out the cost of a Facebook ad, the cost of my email campaign, the cost of my Google ad, and I can see how much money each of those different approaches collected. And it helps me to work out the return on investment from each advertising element. So how much did I make from Facebook ads compared to how much did I spend? Same for email, same for Google ads. And what digital marketing people tend to do is try different channels, like for example Facebook or email or Google, measure the results, see the best one to give you the best, highest return on investment, and therefore focus on that one. And that's why landing pages are created and why they have different addresses, so you can measure the traffic from the different sources and the results from each implementation of the same landing page. That's finished my discussion on the different elements of the online and offline communications mix. Let's now see how those tactics could be used in the context of the RISA model. As we go into the last section of this brief, then let me just take a checkpoint and summarise where we've got to. So far, we've reviewed the use of a range of offline and online digital marketing tactics, different media, the tools and channels of the online and offline communications mix. Now we're going to look at how we can actually use these tactics to support the different steps of the RISA model that we talked about in a previous briefing. We'll then look at how all of these ideas can be used to build and effectively create and manage a communications campaign. I'll start with a short piece of revision about the concept of the stakeholder journey. And if you remember, this was the concept that somebody who knows nothing about your organisation, about your charity, goes through various different stages till they become a long-term member, a donor, a sponsor, a volunteer or a beneficiary with your organisation. They go through the stages of awareness, they consider the possibility of working with you or giving you money or taking the services and the offerings that you offer to beneficiaries. They take a positive action to go to the next step and actually confirm that activity. They're then engaged with the charity, and you want to keep them in a long-term beneficial relationship with the charity for the future. Now, in order to do that, I said that organisations need to think about three different steps: the reach, interact, connect, and then the engage and retain stages. And these are the steps of the RISA model. Now, as you can see here from the diagram, there's no discrete separation between reach, interact, connect, and engage and retain. And some of the activities that we do have an overlap and may affect one or two of these stages. But essentially, for these 4 steps, we're trying to achieve the following thing. In the reach step, we're trying to raise people's awareness of our charity, its offers and its activities. We're trying to get them to interact with us, start a two-way conversation to generate more interest among the different stakeholder groups, to persuade them to go to the 3rd step, which is to connect and take some positive action. If they're a donor or sponsor, we want them to sign up and give us their money. If they're a volunteer, we want them to come on board and start providing their time to support the work of the charity. And if they're beneficiary, we want them to engage with us so we can provide services and offers to alleviate the particular problem that they may have. And what we want to do for most of these stakeholder groups is keep a relationship going, create high satisfaction among those stakeholders so that we can engage and retain a relationship with them in the longer term. And those are the stakeholder journey steps and how organisations use the different steps of the RISA model to achieve awareness, interest, action and satisfaction. If you remember when we talked about the RISA model before, I said there's a worksheet you can develop for each step. So here's an example of the worksheet for the reach step. And the worksheet has 3 columns: the objectives, the tactics and the metrics. And on this example, I'm just giving you some sample objectives, but you'd have to tailor them for your own organisation. But I'm listing in the middle column here, under tactics, the sorts of tools and techniques that would be relevant and are most effective for the reach stage of engaging with stakeholders. So here we're talking about advertising. We can contact and raise people's awareness once they visit our website. We can show them useful and interesting content. We can issue news and public relations messages. We can hold events or social media, free and paid advertising activity. We can do search engine optimization and search engine marketing. I'm not showing any metrics here because they'll be the topic of a much later briefing, but for now the objectives are just samples, but the tactics, I hope you can now see, are the real examples you could use to achieve the objectives in the reach step. So the focus of the reach step is all about advertising, is raising people's awareness. Now often people think they can do email campaigns or email advertising to raise people's awareness. Well, really it's not usually possible to do that because you don't yet have their email address. Now you could of course buy in some email lists, but as I've said before, that's usually not very cost effective and not very efficient. So having email addresses is something that happens in a later stage, and it's something we get to, as you'll see shortly. So the reach stage, the tactics are all about advertising, getting messages out and raising people's awareness of your charity. The next step of the RISA model is I for interact, and here's the worksheet showing some relevant tactics you could use to persuade people and raise their interest to your organisation, to your charity. So the focus here is all about content marketing. It's all about creating and delivering value-added content, whether it's videos or white papers, newsletters, case studies, or information about the work of your charity. And what you want to do is start a conversation to raise their interest in your organisation, to take them to take the next step, which I'll talk about on the following slide. So the tactics you would use in the interact stage here are all about delivering content. Now, when you've got their interest, hopefully in the first stage you've captured their email address, now you can start an email campaign to them, and now you can start emailing them information that's relevant, whether they're a stakeholder who's a donor, a sponsor, a volunteer, or in fact a potential beneficiary of your charity's operation. You can send out newsletters, but as I said before, newsletters should be targeted, so you'd have a different letter to donors and sponsors and a different letter to volunteer, different newsletter for members of staff, and a different newsletter for beneficiaries or users of your charity's products and services. You could deliver videos, latest news, case studies, and you can see here you can deliver messages to influencers. If you want to influence a local authority or a central authority or a legal body, you can start messaging and starting a conversation with them to get them aware of your charity's point of view on any given issue. And again, the metrics column is left blank because that's something we'll cover later on. The third step of the RISA model is connect, and so the tactics here are designed to persuade the user to take some sort of beneficial action. And depending what it is, it could be to create new donations or to offer their time as a volunteer, to volunteer to run an event, to download an event pack, a fundraising pack, or to raise sponsorship. So depending on the stakeholder group, you'll have objectives such as those shown here, which you measure by the number of beneficial positive actions that that group has taken. And in order to do that, the sorts of tactics you use are shown here in the tactics column. It's one-to-one communications primarily, it's email, it's social media, it's targeted, often personalised newsletters or emails or social media messages, or you can invite people into an open day and do some event marketing to show them the activities, to have some fun and to engage with people who might want to work with or be supported by your charity. So the stage here, the concept here, is to persuade different stakeholder groups to take a relevant positive action, and that will mean something in each case. And so whether you're talking to volunteers or donors or users of your service or people who want to offer sponsorship, then you'd set appropriate objectives using the tactics such as those shown here. The fourth step of the RISA model is the step of engage and retain. So let's look at the tactics that might work in that context. What we're looking for is to build long-term income from donors and sponsors and renewals from people with their bank standing order or direct debits. We want to build long-term stakeholder relation and satisfaction. Now, the only stakeholder we may not want a long-term relationship is our beneficiaries. If it's people that we can help or treat or heal, who we hope that they're not going to come back because they don't need our services anymore. But of course, there are some situations where beneficiaries who your charity is supporting because of health or other issues, that might be actually have a relationship with you for the longer term because you're providing lifetime care or support, whatever it happens to be. So the sorts of tactics you can use are things like membership program and benefits. You can arrange briefings and thank you events, social events, dinners and fundraising activities, and also offer merchandise, branded merchandise to help people promote your charity when they're out and about, clothing, hats, t-shirts, golf umbrellas and so on. Now there is one tactic that I've used successfully here which I call the advisory panel, and I've worked with a number of charities and helped them set up an advisory panel which is an informal group with a number of people from different fields. So if you're a medical charity, you could have somebody from the field of medicine, somebody from the politics, perhaps an MP or a minister. If it was a charity that was dealing with, for example, post-traumatic stress disorder, you might have somebody from the armed services, and you might have somebody from a faith group. In the case of the one I'm thinking of, they actually recruited a bishop to be on their advisory panel, and another charity that does work for deprived children had a celebrity, somebody who, when they were a child, was supported and helped by that charity, and now they're a senior person in the music industry. So think of 3 or 4 people, high profile people you can invite to be an advisory panel to your charity. You recognise them with a dinner or some sort of social event a couple of times a year, and basically they put their names on your letterhead, they write thought pieces, and they represent your charity in their different fields. So whether it's the armed services, in politics and government, in a faith group, or in a particular social circle like musicians or film people, then they can have a voice and mention your charity in their day-to-day activities. They're like roving ambassadors for your charity, and that's something that's worked quite successfully with a number of charities that I've helped in the past. So, as I said at the bottom here, the objectives are to build long-term stakeholder relationships, repeat value-added interactions, whether it's donations, sponsorships, volunteering, and to create satisfied stakeholders who, generally speaking, you hope will be with you and work with you and for you for the longer term. I'm going to wrap this briefing up with the last stage now, which is talking about campaign planning. So, a campaign is a short-term piece of marketing communications designed to achieve an aim and deliver some specific objectives to your charity. And generally speaking, campaigns are built using the 3Ms model that I've outlined to you before. And to remind you, it's the messages that you want to deliver, the markets, who are the groups of stakeholders to whom you wish to communicate, and the methods are the tactics that we've now learned about and discussed in this briefing. They would go in the middle section. So what's shown here in method 1, method 2, method 3 are literally the online and offline tactics that I've spent some time summarising and discussing earlier in this briefing. Once you've built a chart or a table like that, what you would need to do is build a roadmap or a timetable showing the activities, the dates, the resources and the budgets that you would need to deliver those messages to those markets using both methods during the duration of the campaign, whether it's a month or 3 months or 6 months or sometimes something longer. Now, the actual control and management of a campaign will be covered later on towards the end of this series of briefings when I get onto the action step of the SOSTAC model. But for now, just let me remind you that the tactics we've talked about fit into this model in the methods that are shown here across the middle of this diagram. So when we're delivering marketing communications or messages to a particular market, there are certain patterns that are quite common in the intensity and frequency with which you deliver your messaging depending on the sort of sector that you're in and whether it's a seasonal or non-seasonal business. So first of all, top left, there is the steady media pattern, which is consistent week after week, reminders and reinforcement of the strength and quality of your brand, or new charities in our case. And this is a steady, consistent messaging. Now, this is often used by market leaders. So if you think of somebody like Wrigley's Chewing Gum, or McDonald's Burgers, or SR Toothpaste, these are the leaders, but they continue to remind people to keep their brand at the front of our mind. So when we want food, we go to McDonald's. When we want chewing gum, we go to Wrigley's. Or when we want toothpaste, we go to the leading brand. So there's other sorts. So for example, let's see here. There's there's a pulsing campaign and on the right hand side there, which means you have high intensity periods and perhaps lower level and then high intensity again. This might be for holidays, for example. So coming up to Christmas, there might be an intensive couple of months where coming up to Christmas and the New Year, there's massive holiday advertising which goes into the New Year. It drops off again through the first few months of the calendar year, so it's less in February, March, then it picks up again in April, May, June, when there's a huge intense burst of advertising ready for the summer holiday season. So that would be a pulsing campaign. There's seasonal campaigns, for example, if you're selling Christmas cards or ice cream or Easter eggs, you'd have advertising that just related to the season where it's relevant, and you have campaigns building up, stepping up if you're doing a new product launch, and you have step down campaigns if you're trying to sell out and get rid of excess stock through a sale process. So you really just need to tailor your media pattern to the intention and the duration of your particular campaign, its aims and objectives. Every campaign, of course, is different, but let me give you some general top tips that I found from quite a few years of experience of doing marketing communications and campaigns on the sorts of things you need to think about to make sure your campaigns are efficient and cost efficient. So as well as ongoing communications, a campaign can be a short-term burst of activity, as I say, for weeks or months or a quarter or so, to achieve particular short-term objectives. So in order to make campaigns successful, I make the following recommendations. You should set smart objectives for the campaign. What are you trying to achieve? What numbers are you trying to make, and what would success look like? And you can do a campaign for the different stages in the RISA model. You can do a campaign to recruit new individuals. You can do a campaign to keep people loyal. You can do a campaign to promote a new offer that you're bringing to the marketplace. So decide what your aims are and then set appropriate smart objectives, such as the ones I've shown you as examples on the RISA worksheets previously. Define the duration of the campaign and think about the tactics that you're going to use. Is it online or offline? Are you going to use social media, pay-per-click advertising, emails, or offline tools and techniques such as events, lobbying, public relations, or perhaps some radio or local print advertising? Plan the budget and the resources and the timetable. As I said, that will be covered later in the briefing when I talk about the action step of the SOSTAC model. Decide whether you're going to resource this activity from in-house, or you're going to use outsourced resources from an agency or a media company, for example. Run a test if it's appropriate, and then, for example, if it's an email or a landing page, see which ones work, which structures work, test them on a small section of your target market, and once you've identified the best format for an email and the best layout for a landing page, launch the campaign to the total target market. Measure the results and learn and adapt for the future. So there's my generic top tips for successful campaign management and planning. Well, that's brought us to the end of this briefing. I know it was quite a long one and quite arduous, so if you need to go back on any of the sections, then please feel free to do so, review, rewind and rewatch any of the sections for this if you just need to remind yourself of any of the detail. I do appreciate it was quite an in-depth briefing. Let's just position now where we've got to in our journey with marketing planning for charities and look at the next step. In the next briefing, I'm going to move on, staying on tactics, I'm going to move on and talk about a particular aspect of tactics and how we can use them in the specific area of fundraising, because I know this is important to so many charities. So that's going to be the topic of our next briefing. I'll remind you, as I've done before, that if you have any questions or comments or feedback, I'd love to hear from you. If you email me at peter.rees@gmail.com, I'll answer any emails as soon as I can. Let me conclude this briefing then, as I usually do, with a quotation. This is one from a Chinese general called Sun Tzu, who lived about 500 years BC, and he said that tactics without strategy is the noise before the defeat. And often charities want to get stuck in and talk about the tactics, and should they use Facebook, or should they do advertising, or should they use a new brochure, or should they redesign their website. But from what I hope I've been able to explain to you so far, tactics are really the tools and techniques you need to deliver strategy. So unless you've formulated your strategy properly, then coming up with tactics is at best a sort of haphazard and possibly ineffective way to proceed. So set the strategy first and then fill it in with the tactics that we've been discussing in this and previous briefings. Well, this has been quite a long briefing, hasn't it? So I'd like to thank you for your time, for sticking with it and joining me here at the end. I'd just like to thank you. I hope you found this useful, interesting and informative. I look forward to joining you soon for the next briefing in this series. And until we meet again, good luck and good marketing.